Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. This is Hélène Musikas, and I am with the team of Odyssey 314 live for this first Hangout. So we have today Laurence Lehmann-Ortega.
Hello.
And we have also our digital team at HEC. We have Ashraf and Anubhuti and Gautam with us as well today.
Hello, everyone.
So we're going. So we're going to have a short presentation before we move into a number of questions that are frequently asked regarding Odyssey 314. So let's look at the slides.
So maybe we can just talk about the agenda for today, Hélène. We wanted to give you a few numbers about the course, but also then talk to you about the course, how the course is doing, the questions on the forums that you would like to see. And also don't hesitate to ask questions, because of course the whole objective of a live Hangout is to have your live questions. So don't hesitate to give us your questions.
Okay, so in terms of numbers, we've started our first cohort on April 20, 2016. We have now over 1,300 learners from 125 countries. Right now, the ratings have been pretty good at 4.8, and we have 90% likes. The top countries in terms of learners are France, the US, India, Great Britain, Germany, Brazil, Mexico, and we have over 150 learners from Africa. So the feedback has been pretty good so far, and thank you for the feedback. It helps us improve. I'm just going to quote a few of them. Odyssey 314 is an excellent approach to business models, and I appreciate the MOOC. The course is very inspirational. I highly advise to enroll in it. It's been an eye-opener. It's a truly pioneering course that has been explained in simple and straightforward terms. So these are very encouraging, and we hope that we can even improve further the MOOC moving forward. Maybe Laurence, you'd like to, before we move on to the frequently asked questions, to maybe recap somewhat the course content and how it's structured?
Mm-hmm. So just for you to remember the course, there are 5 weeks during this online course. The first week is about an introduction on business model innovation, where we really explain what business model innovation is all about. The second week, we address the 3 components of the business model. So that's the 3 part of the Odyssey 314. We talk about the value proposition, the value architecture, the profit equation, and we also provide every time a number of examples. The week 3, we start the 14 directions. So week 3 is about 7 directions on the value proposition side, and week 4 is about the 7 directions on the value architecture side. And finally, week 5 is the week that where it's your turn to apply the Odyssey 314 approach, and it's the second peer-graded assignment. So each week has a graded quiz. We try to give you a multiple number of quizzes so that you can test and see what you learned during the week, and there are 2 peer-graded assessments.
So, Laurence, would you like as well to kind of summarize the 3 pillars of the business model, how we see that, and the 14 directions?
Sure.
That we're exposing?
So there are, as you know by now, the Odyssey 314 direction relies on the 3 pillars of the business model. So the first pillar is the value proposition. And what we do during the course is to explain how the value curve can be a very helpful tool to depict your value proposition. The second pillar of the business model is what we call the value architecture. So the value architecture answers the question how is the company structured, organized to deliver this value proposition in due time to the customer. And in the value proposition, you have the value chain, but also the whole ecosystem, the whole value network of the company, that is the partners this company can work with, and all the other stakeholders it has to take into account. And then finally, the third pillar is the profit equation. And the profit equation stems from the value proposition, but also the value architecture. The profit equation is a financial way of looking at the value proposition and the value architecture. It gives a summary, financial view of the value proposition and the value architecture. We then have 14 directions, 7 directions on the value proposition side and 7 directions on the value architecture side. There are no directions for the profit equation because, again, for us, the profit equation is just a financial way to read the two previous components. And so those are the 3 pillars, and the 14 directions. So should we...
Maybe, Laurence, what we could do is remind our participants that the way we actually have come up with the 14 directions is to look at many examples of companies that in their own industries, whether as newcomers or actually as established incumbents, I would say, have been able to bring about business models.
Yes.
The other thing we could mention is that this phenomenon of changing business model is absolutely not new, even though it's accelerating these days. This is why we are illustrating each of our points, each of our 14 directions, with actually recent examples and less recent examples of companies that were successful in doing so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think the business model innovation has become something very trendy today, but it's important, you're right, Hélène, to remind our participants that this has existed forever. What has changed probably in the last years is the fact that with the digitalization, there have been many new opportunities to create new business models. But again, you're right, this has been around for years and years.
Okay, so I suggest we now maybe talk about some frequently asked questions that we receive either through the MOOC or during our face-to-face courses, and then we will move to live questions. So one of the first questions that is very frequently asked during our interaction with participants is around the framework itself, the business model framework. And the question is how this framework can actually be used in a, I would say, non-for-profit or non-business environment. What I would say is that initially it was actually conceived for a normal business that whose main objective is actually making an economic return or a profit. But we have surprisingly figured out, as we are developing this, that it's actually very powerful and simple to be used in non-profit environment. So two situations, for example. The first one would be a typical NGO that basically does have a value proposition, for example, to society, does have a value architecture. It's the description of how it does things. The only difference is that its profit equation, or its aim, if you wish, its ultimate goal is not profit, but it could be some social impact, for example. So the business model framework to actually think about the way you do things today and what you offer today and how you could do differently in the future is totally useful and applicable in a non-for-profit environment, such as, for example, a non-for-profit organization. Even more, if you think about support functions within companies, let's say supply chain, let's talk about HR or learning, or let's talk about financial services, the approach again is very valid. You can very well imagine for a supply chain function a value proposition to the other parties in the company, to the other stakeholders in the company, you can very well imagine describing a value architecture for how this support function of supply chain is working. And you can very much imagine a third pillar around how the supply chain, for example, increases either profit or cost. So again, here we might not have the ROC as the KPI, the key performance indicator of the model, but some other that might be financial. But again, it's a very simple framework, but very comprehensive, I would say, and very versatile. So that's really one of the questions that come up regularly. And I have to say that we've used this approach for working in workshops with support teams, okay, when they are thinking of, redefining how they work internally. A second frequently asked question that comes up again very regularly is, what's the difference between the I would say the framework we're using with 3 pillars and I would say maybe a better known, more widely known framework, which is called the business model canvas. I would say there's a lot of difference and there's not so much difference. The business model concept is not, I would say, totally standardized these days. So a lot of consultants and academics have proposed ways to, in a structured way, describe a business model, okay? So we're proposing an approach with 3 pillars. It has the advantages of being simple. Some other consultants or academics have proposed the business model canvas, which is also a structured approach that has more, I would say, more spaces to fill, okay, more spaces, because it's a framework that presents, I would say, 9 different elements to fill in, a template that is a bit more complex. But if we compare, element by element, we would see that in the topics that they trigger, in the topics that they address, they are actually very close. One thing, though, that we would not find in the business model canvas that I feel is very important for business models is the idea of capital employed. In the business model canvas, you're going to be asked to describe your revenue, the elements of your revenue and the elements of your cost. We also have that in our 3rd pillar, the profit equation. However, with our profit equation, which is basically discussing not only revenue and cost, but also capital employed to actually reach that revenue and those costs, I don't think we find it as such in the business model canvas. So I would say that they actually address the same topics. Ours is maybe a bit more simple, and it addresses slightly differently the part related to the profit equation. Maybe Laurence, you would like to add something on this point?
No, I think this is a good. This is exactly the difference. Maybe we can take an example about this. If you look at the value proposition, for example, of 2 companies in the car industry, I mean in the mobility industry, I should say, which are BlaBlaCar that we mentioned in the MOOC, and on one side, and Zipcar on the other side. So BlaBlaCar is a website that will connect you with people who don't have a car if you want to go from a place to another. And BlaBlaCar is just a website, so it means that the capital employed is very, very low of this company. On the other hand, you have Zipcar, and Zipcar allows you to have a car, to go for a ride on a car if you don't have a car, to just rent a car for an hour, for example. And so the value propositions are very close. They're basically a way of having a mobility if you don't have a car. The capital employed structure, however, is very different, because in BlaBlaCar, as I mentioned, it's a website, so it's a very, very low capital employed. But on the other hand, for Zipcar, they actually own the car, which means a very high level of capital employed. So the way you're going to reach profitability, your ROC in those 2 businesses, is very different. So this is, as Hélène mentioned, one of the main differences with the business model canvas. Okay. Maybe before we switch to the next question, I would just like to call on you if you have any live questions. So don't hesitate to post them now, so that we can deal with them just in a couple of minutes. Before we go to your questions, to your live questions, there is another question that very often comes up in the forums, which is about platform business models, also sometimes called double-sided business models. And indeed, this is a very specific question, and I think it's worthwhile addressing it. Let's take an example of a double-sided market. So, for example, Airbnb, Uber would be a double-sided market. But they have been, those double-sided markets have been around for a very long time. For example, I was just teaching Odyssey in Doha last week in Qatar. Well, basically the souk in Qatar could be called a double-sided market. It brings together people who want to buy something and merchants. So again, the notion of platform business is not new. The difference is that with the internet, those businesses have managed to scale at a very, very fast pace. So if I go back to my Airbnb example, so Airbnb is a website that connects house owners or apartment owners who want to rent their house and lenders who want to rent a place for a couple of days. So the difference with a conventional business model is that we could say that Airbnb has two value propositions. It has a value proposition to the lender and a value proposition to the renter. And so they have two value propositions that they have to develop at the same time, because if you don't have a lender, you don't have a renter, and the other way around. So what is very difficult in those type of business models, what is specific in those type of business models, very often we hear that they're easier because they're online, but they're actually much more difficult because you have to attract two types of customer at the same time, the lender on one side and the renter on the other hand, the house owner on the other hand. So in platform businesses, you have two or several value propositions, by the way, because sometimes it can be multi-sided platforms. So for example, LinkedIn is a multi-sided platform because they have the individuals like you and me who are on LinkedIn. Then you have the companies who advertise on LinkedIn, but you also have the companies who use LinkedIn services to search people, for example. So it's a multi-sided market, and you have to develop a specific value proposition for each of those customers. What makes them very special as business model is this first thing that I mentioned, the idea that you have to attract all sides of the market at the same time, which is sometimes called the chicken and egg problem, because you have to attract them all at the same time. What is also very specific is that you can have some very, very interesting pricing strategies. So this is something that we have explored in our direction number 7 about the revenue streams. For example, it's very interesting, it can be very interesting in a double-sided market to give the product or the service out for free to some side of the market to attract the other. So for example, LinkedIn, if I go back to the LinkedIn example, we don't pay for LinkedIn as users because they wanted us to go onto LinkedIn and to use LinkedIn, right? So a part of the LinkedIn business model is a freemium business model. So for individuals, you don't have to pay if you don't want to pay, basically. So pricing, so the chicken and egg problem and the pricing strategies are two very specific things to platform businesses that we didn't directly address in the online course, but we slightly addressed. We mentioned several times that there were double-sided or multi-sided markets. Hélène, would you like to add something on this?
No. I think that was great. Maybe we have one more frequently asked question, and then we will move to the live questions. We already have a few. So the last frequently asked question was a question relative to the value curve and how you actually do it for real, I would say, when you're in a company. We like the value curve very much because it's a graphic way to compare your own value proposition with another one. It could be a new one that you're thinking of. It could be the one of your competitors. And so I think that a lot of our participants grab the interest of the value curve really fast, and they want to actually do it in their own companies. So how would you do that? The first thing I would say is that it requires customer insights, because you have to put yourself in the shoes of your customer or clients, and it means that you have some intimacy with the customer. That being said, I think the best way to actually build it, and where it, building the value curve actually triggers the most interesting discussions in companies, is to have a diverse group of people sit around the table. So to move away from, pure marketing people who are the representative of the customer insight, but take people from the back office, from the sales team, potentially even clients or third parties, okay? So to have a diverse group of people around the table, and try to list together in an iterative way the value attribute. So basically, what are really the criteria that clients or customers are using to choose our value proposition versus, some other value proposition. So this is actually the most interesting part of it, because then you can move away, especially I would say in B2B types of businesses, you can move away from functionalities of your product or value proposition to really things that matter for clients. And it's always very often very revealing. Once you have agreed on the list of value attributes, and that's not easy, you want to actually, maybe with a scale of 1 to 5, for each of those value attributes, try to, I would say, with as much objectivity as possible, to actually grade how much your value proposition offers on each one of these attributes. And it's really about how much you offer. We're not looking at whether it's good or bad. We're really looking at how much your value proposition offers of that specific attribute, okay? And so basically you would go into a little survey by each of the participants and grade your view from 1 to 5. And again, you would also do this for another value proposition, again, an old one of yours or one of your competitors, because this tool is really about comparing. It's not about, drawing the right value curve in absolute terms. It's comparing your value curve with another one and seeing how this other one is innovative or not, compared to the existing one you have. So that what I would say about building the value curve. It's really a great tool, and it really triggers the most interesting discussion in companies. Okay, so I think now, Laurence, we have a few live questions, and maybe we can move to that, if it's okay with you. I don't know if, Laurence, you see them, if you want to take the first one, or...
Yes, so I can take the first one. So the first question is from Zemi Nevos, who asked how to evaluate business model for complex IT service companies like Accenture and IBM. So my first answer would be that those companies don't have a single business model, but several business models. So the first challenge is to identify how many business models those firms have, because I think they really have many of them. And if you break the company down into several different business models, then you will start realizing that that you can analyze them in a much more convenient way. And so what looks like very complex businesses, such as companies that you mentioned, if you wrinkle it down to very specific business models, then it will make more sense to analyze them. You can actually look at the company as a portfolio of business models. And so when you analyze those business models, you really need to go down on individual business models. Do you want to add something on this, Hélène? Or?
No, I think you're perfectly right. What I would say is that the term evaluating could be broken in two. You could think about describing the business model, and then it's perfectly adapted to service companies like the two that were mentioned. And then I would say evaluating requires to compare it with someone else's business model. So to say that a business model is better or not, or worse than another one, you have to compare it within a given industry. So you could compare the value proposition, the value architecture, or the profit equation, of course. We have another question relative actually to the competition, and Lalit asks, so let me just read that. Okay, Lalit asks, would you like to comment on how competition is factored in the framework? So actually that's an excellent transition, because I would say that the framework is to be applied on one business for one company, okay? You're going to describe the business model of a given company. For example, we're going to describe the business model of Zara in the apparel industry, okay? To factor in competition, we would have to describe the business models in that same industry of the other competitors. So for example, we could describe the business model of the Gap in the apparel industry. And then we would actually compare how they build their value proposition, how different or similar are their value architecture, and as a result, how similar, close, or very different are their profit equation, in other words, their ROCE. So basically I would say competition itself is not built in the framework, it's comparing different business model that is going to give you insights on how different or how similar you are from your competition. The other thing you can do, of course, is using the value curve to compare your own value curve from your own value proposition to the one of competition or to different competitors. And then you will visually immediately see, and I refer to our previous discussion, how close or different you are in your value proposition from the competition.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see another live question that says, should we think of value proposition as a brand proposition or a brand promise? I would rather think of value propositions as the job to be done for the customer rather than just a brand promise. If I make the difference here, if you think about value proposition, it's really what is the job that we are going to do for the customer. I think the brand promise, at least from what I understand about brand promises, is more vague. And in this case, so I would distinguish, I would say it's more the job to be done than the brand promise. Do you want to add something on this, Hélène, or what is your standpoint on this one?
No, I think it's fine. I'd like to move to another question we have, which is about the 14 directions. The question is the following, so let me just find it again, which is, should we consider that the 14 directions that we describe in Odyssey 314 are a form of idea generation rather than specific processes to manage the innovation? So the answer is definitely yes. It's absolutely thought of as a help for idea generation. Basically, it's a help to brainstorm in a structured way about new business models. But of course, it is not, I would say, complete to manage innovation. There's much more to managing innovation in a company than using Odyssey 314. There are many, many other options available. But this Odyssey 314 approach is a tool to actually think about innovation in a different way than just product innovation, and to actually, yes, manage brainstorming sessions, ideally with diverse groups about new business models. I think, Laurence, we might have at least, we're almost done with the time, but I mean, we might have one or two more questions. Let me just check. No, I think we're fine. Do you want to add other things, Laurence?
Yes, I think there is a question. Maybe we can come back on this one because it comes back, and it's a very tricky one. It's in the value curve. When we draw a value curve, what's the difference between price and price attractiveness? So basically, you remember that on the value curve, you're actually giving a level to the attribute. So if it's high, you're very happy. If the attribute is low, you're unhappy. So when you tag it as price, if you remember our example with bottled water and tap water, when the price is high, like for a bottle of Evian, as a customer, you would not be very happy. So usually when the price is high, then the tag is low. The attribute is low. And when the price is low, then the attribute is high, which makes it sometimes confusing. This is why we labeled it very often price attractiveness, just to make sure that we remember that when the price is high, the value of the attribute is low, and then when the price is low, the value of the attribute is high. So this is why we use rather price attractiveness than price.
I think we have another one. Let me just read through it.
Maybe we can just read it.
Okay, so it's a bit long. How flexible would you judge a business model should be? Okay. Okay, what I would say is that I don't think it's possible to know really in advance how flexible is a business model, apart from one thing, and maybe I'll ask Laurence on this point, which is the capital employed. Because if there is a high capital employed in a given business model, it usually means two things. Either you have high investment in the business, so it means that changing rapidly the way you do things might be a bit difficult because you have, you know, a lot of money that went into the investment. If it's your working capital that is really high, it's probably also not so easy to change this quickly. So apart from this, I would say that it's quite difficult beforehand to know whether a business model is going to be flexible or not, because it's going to depend on many elements of the environment. That's what I would say. I don't know if Laurence, you'd like
yes,
to
maybe we can also add something else. It depends on which stage you are in your business model. If you come up with a completely new business model, if you're a startup company, then it should be very highly flexible, because what you want to do is to experiment with this business model and to make it as flexible as possible to be able to pivot. Because if you bring a business model to the market, value proposition to the market, and that you realize that value proposition is not attractive to the customer, then you need to be very agile and to be able to pivot and to change your value proposition. But once you've scaled up your business, you have tested it, you have experimented it, and you scaled it up, then you fall into the problems that Hélène just mentioned about capital employed, and then probably your business model is less flexible than it is at the start.
Yes. What we can probably say is that very few companies get the business model right the first time. If you look at, if you look back at the history of the most successful business models, like let's just take Amazon, in the beginning, their initial hypothesis was very different from what they have become today. If you remember Amazon in its inception, it was supposed to be a company with no warehouses that would directly send books from the printer or the editor directly to customers. And what Amazon has become today is totally different because, for example, they have covered the world almost with huge warehouses and have become the experts of fulfillment for e-commerce. So companies like this have actually iterated many times on the right business model. And it's also, of course, the case of smaller startups. You don't get the right balance, I would say, between value proposition, value architecture, and profit equation right away. And you have to iterate many times and sometimes many years before they find the right equilibrium. So maybe, Laurence, we can close this session if you would like to say a word of conclusion.
Thank you very much for your live questions. They were very relevant and very interesting. So what we can do now is move to some of the new initiatives that we have taken for the MOOC, for the Odyssey 314 MOOC. And so here we can show some slides about this. I don't know if you see the slides. If not, we can just talk about the content. Hélène, do you? Or?
Yes, I think we wanted to mention one thing, which is Study Buddy. So maybe we will post the details of this, but it's the idea of having a peer coaching, I would say, in a given geography, a given time zone, and a given language to actually encourage discussion and support. So that's one initiative. And the last thing that we wanted to mention, of course, is that we invite you to discover, if you like this MOOC, the other MOOCs that HEC has on Coursera, because we have been basically publishing and doing several MOOCs in the past year or past few months, I would say.
Okay. So I think we are done with our live hangout tonight. It was really nice to be able to talk to you live and to answer your questions live. I hope you are still very excited about the Odyssey 314 MOOC, just as we are, and the Odyssey 314 approach. Don't hesitate to join us also on Facebook for those who haven't done it yet. We try to publish every week a new business model or new information about Odyssey 3.14. Thank you so much, and I hope to talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Yeah, me too. Goodbye, and good night or good evening. Bye.